You are standing on a rain-slicked boulevard in the dead of night, where the blinding glare of white neon reflects off the asphalt like a fractured mirror. It is 1934, and the air around you is thick with the competing scents of expensive French perfume, cheap gin, and the sharp metallic tang of ozone from the massive studio Klieg lights cutting through the California fog. To the rest of the world, looking through the pristine glass of a movie theater ticket booth, this place is an ethereal dreamland, a modern Olympus where gods and goddesses walk in silk and tuxedos, immune to the grinding poverty of the Great Depression. But as you step away from the bright, manicured perimeter of the premiere and slip into the long, velvet-draped shadows of the studio backlot, the temperature seems to drop. The music from the orchestra grows faint, replaced by a low, rhythmic hum, the sound of an industrial machine that never sleeps, never pities, and never stops consuming the young and the beautiful. You look closer at the faces under the wide-brimmed fedoras and the perfectly curled Marcel waves, and you begin to notice the fractures in the porcelain. The smiles are too wide, held in place by a desperate, exhausting effort of the will. The eyes are bright, but it is a brittle, chemically induced brightness, sustained by little white pills handed out in paper cups by studio-appointed doctors before the sun even rises. This is the golden age of Hollywood, an era engineered to perfection by a handful of men sitting in wood-paneled offices, men who discovered that the most lucrative commodity on earth was not oil or gold, but human illusion. And to manufacture an illusion this pure, this intoxicating, requires an unimaginable amount of human wreckage. The studio system of the 1930s does not see creators or artists when it looks at the desperate young men and women arriving on the Santa Fe Super Chief train every morning. It sees raw material. You can feel the crushing weight of this realization as you walk past the towering sound stages of Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer or Paramount. These are not sanctuaries of art. They are windowless, soundproofed factories operating 24 hours a day, designed to strip away an individual's identity, rebuild them from the skeletal structure up, and exploit them until the marrow is dry. If you were to sign your name on that dotted line, on the standard 7-year option contract that every wide-eyed, hopeful dreams of, you would not be entering a profession. You would be surrendering your legal personhood. From the moment the ink dries, the studio owns your name, which they will likely change because your ancestral surname sounds too foreign, too cluttered, or lacks the rhythmic symmetry required for a marquee. They own your hair, which will be dyed, plucked, or completely shaved at the hairline to alter the shape of your skull. They own your teeth, which will be extracted or capped in painful, primitive dental procedures to ensure a symmetrical smile under the unforgiving glare of the lens. They own your history, fabricating a colorful, wholesome Midwestern upbringing to replace the painful reality of your immigrant roots or your poverty-stricken childhood. But far more terrifying than the physical transformation is the absolute colonization of your private life. You cannot marry without the explicit written permission of the studio executives. You cannot choose who you love, who you sit next to at a restaurant, or how you spend your Sunday afternoons. Every public appearance is scripted. Every romance is a carefully coordinated publicity stunt, engineered by the studio's loyalty department to bolster a box office narrative or suppress a dangerous rumor. The studio assigns you a companion, a lifestyle, and a public morality that must be maintained at all costs. under the constant threat of the dreaded morals clause, a legal trapdoor that allows them to void your contract, ruin your reputation, and cast you into the wilderness at the first sign of independence or scandal. As the midnight fog rolls in from the Pacific, swallowing the palm trees and softening the harsh edges of the studio gates, you begin to understand the psychological claustrophobia of this existence. There is nowhere to run, because the studio's reach extends far beyond the studio walls. They control the local police departments, the district attorneys, the gossip columnists, and the hotels. If you falter, if you break down weeping in your dressing room from sheer exhaustion after an 18-hour shooting day, you are not given rest. You are given an injection. If you gain 3 pounds, your food is confiscated, and you are placed on a mandatory diet of black coffee, cigarettes, and thyroid extract. If you become pregnant out of wedlock, or even within a marriage that doesn't fit the studio's marketing strategy, you are quietly driven in a black limousine to a private clinic in the middle of the night, where a studio-retained surgeon performs an appendectomy in total silence. This is the bargain of the Golden Age. You are offered immortality, luxury, and the adoration of millions who will worship your shadow on a silver screen long after you are gone. But the price of admission is your autonomy, your privacy, and your sanity. The dazzling light you see from afar is not the warmth of a paradise. It is the incinerator, where human souls are burned to keep the projector running. As we journey deeper into the dark heart of this glittering decade, we will pull back the velvet curtain to look at the machinery of exploitation, the architecture of blackmail, and the quiet, forgotten tragedies of the individuals who gave everything to become ghosts in the American imagination. You are observing a crowded, soot-stained platform at the Los Angeles Central Station, where the screech of iron wheels against iron rails creates a deafening crescendo. It is the height of the Dust Bowl and the Great Depression. Thousands are fleeing the barren, wind-stripped farms of Oklahoma, the shuttered textile mills of New England, and the impoverished, crowded tenements of New York's Lower East Side. Among them steps a teenager, clutching a single, battered cardboard suitcase. She has survived on nothing but hope and a few bruised apples during the 4-day transcontinental journey. She possesses a symmetrical face, wide, striking eyes, and a desperate desire to escape a past marked by rural poverty, broken families, or childhood trauma. To her, this sun-drenched valley looks like salvation. She does not know that she has just entered a highly sophisticated, predatory ecosystem that has been waiting for someone exactly like her. The men who built the Hollywood studio system, moguls like Louis B. Mayer, Adolph Zukor, and Harry Cohn, were not born into wealth or artistic pedigree. They were fiercely ambitious, often ruthless immigrants or sons of immigrants who had escaped the brutal pogroms of Eastern Europe and the crushing poverty of industrial cities. They understood the psychology of hunger because they had known it intimately. They knew that the most vulnerable person in the world is the one who has nothing to lose and everything to prove. When these men looked at the desperate, beautiful teenagers arriving on the trains, they did not see artists. They recognized their own past hunger, and they knew exactly how to exploit it. You can trace the machinery of this exploitation to the very first step a newcomer takes into the city. The studios maintained a vast, informal network of talent scouts, beauty pageant directors, and casting agents who combed the country for raw material. But within the borders of Los Angeles itself, a darker, predatory industry flourished. The fake acting academies, the corrupt photographers, and the sleazy talent managers who preyed on the thousands of girls who failed to get past the studio gates on their first day. These men promised introductions to executives, demanding rent, companionship, or total compliance in exchange for a screen test that would never happen. This was the casting couch in its rawest, most pervasive form. Not an occasional scandal, but a structural gatekeeper. To even be noticed by a legitimate studio, many had to survive a gauntlet of casual, normalized sexual barter that chipped away at their dignity before their careers even began. If a young woman or man was fortunate enough or unfortunate enough to be selected for a studio screen test, the process of psychological and physical erasure began immediately. You watch as a young girl is brought into the studio makeup department under the harsh, unyielding glare of 100 light bulbs. She is surrounded by older men who speak about her as if she were a piece of livestock at an auction. They discuss the width of her nose, the spacing of her eyes, the fullness of her thighs, and the thickness of her ankles. If her nose is deemed too ethnic, a surgeon is called to break the bone and reshape it. If her hairline is too low, a painful, agonizing process of electrolysis is ordered, burning away the roots of her hair, millimeter by millimeter, over several weeks to create a higher, more aristocratic forehead. This physical remodeling was accompanied by a total dismantling of the self. The studio legal department would draft a new biography, erasing the applicant's real family, their cultural heritage, and their name. A girl born Lucille LeSueur becomes Joan Crawford. A boy born Spangler Arlington Bruh becomes Robert Taylor. The studio forbade these young actors from contacting their old friends or families from their past lives, believing that an audience could not believe in a glamorous screen goddess if there was any risk of a cousin from Ohio showing up to remind the public of her dirt farm origins. They were isolated, cut off from their roots, and placed into a gilded cage where their only family was the studio itself. The psychological trauma of this transformation was profound. You are looking at individuals who looked into the mirror every morning and no longer recognized the person staring back at them. They were forced to perform a character 24 hours a day. Not just when the cameras were rolling, the studio assigned them a specific vocabulary, a specific way of walking, and a specific set of opinions. They were taught how to smoke, how to hold a cocktail glass, and how to look at a man with the exact balance of innocence and invitation that the current market demanded. They became products, manufactured to satisfy the collective fantasies of a desperate American public that needed something perfect to look at while the economy collapsed around them. Yet, the hunger that brought them to Hollywood never truly left them. The fear of being sent back to the tenements, the farms, or the abusive households they had fled kept them compliant. They signed contracts that guaranteed them a pittance, often as little as $50 a week during their apprenticeship, while the studio rented them out to other companies for thousands of dollars a week. Pocketing the profit, they worked through illness, through injury, and through profound emotional distress, because they knew that behind them on that train platform stood 10,000 more, just as beautiful, just as desperate, waiting to take their place the moment they faltered. The system was designed to keep them in a perpetual state of anxiety, a psychological twilight where they were worshipped by millions, but owned entirely by a handful of men who could destroy their lives with a single phone call. You are walking through the heavy, soundproofed doors of an executive office at 3 o'clock in the morning, where the air is thick with the scent of expensive Cuban tobacco, stale whiskey, and the distinct underlying dread of a calculated betrayal. On the mahogany desk sits a thick manila folder stamped in red ink. Inside are not scripts or box office receipts, but surveillance reports, grainy photographs, and signed statements from hotel bellhops. This is the inner sanctum of the studio's fixer, the shadow department tasked with managing the human collateral of Hollywood's rapid ascent. You look at the young actor, sitting in the leather chair opposite the desk. His hands are shaking, despite the pristine tailoring of his suit. He has just achieved his first taste of box office stardom, but tonight he learns the terrifying truth of his success. The higher you climb in the studio system, the tighter the noose becomes. The ascent to stardom in the 1930s was never a straight line of talent and hard work. It was a treacherous transaction of leverage. Once an actor transitioned from a low-paid contract player to a bankable star, their value to the studio skyrocketed into millions of dollars. But to the moguls who ran the industry, a valuable star who possessed free will was a dangerous liability. To protect their investments, studios utilized a sophisticated internal intelligence network, often staffed by former private investigators, corrupt ex-police officers, and blacklisted journalists. Their job was to build a dossier on every rising talent, every secret romance, every late-night car crash, every hidden substance addiction, and every private vulnerability. This information was rarely used to destroy a star immediately. Instead, it was kept as a permanent mechanism of control. The message was unspoken but clear. We made you. We protect you from the public, and we can unmake you before sunrise. You can see this predatory leverage clearest in the enforcement of the morals clause, embedded deep within the standard 7-year contract. This clause gave the studio the unilateral right to terminate an actor's employment, seize their residuals, and blackball them from the industry if they engaged in conduct that brought public disrepute, contempt, or scandal. In an era where the Catholic Legion of Decency and local censorship boards held immense power over theater bookings, the definition of scandal was weaponized to suppress any form of personal independence. If a star demanded a higher salary, a script revision, or a break from an exhausting shooting schedule, the fixer would quietly lay a photograph or a police report on the table. The rebellion ended instantly. The cost of this ascent was borne heavily by those whose true identities did not conform to the rigidly engineered heteronormative fantasies of the American mainstream. You enter a hidden world of forced marriages and fabricated heterosexuality, the lavender marriages, orchestrated by studio publicity departments. Gay, lesbian, and bisexual actors were forced into lavender marriages with other contract players to safeguard their careers. The studio selected the spouse, financed the lavish public wedding, arranged the photo shoots for fan magazines depicting marital bliss, and even monitored their shared residences to ensure the public facade never cracked. To live authentically meant immediate professional execution. The psychological toll of living a dual existence under constant surveillance drove many to the brink of collapse. transforming their grand estates into paranoid, gilded prisons. For the young women navigating this ascent, the exploitation was uniquely cruel. The studio system treated female stars as highly perishable commodities with a strictly limited shelf life to maximize productivity during their peak years. The studios relied heavily on a network of compliant physicians, colloquially known as Dr. Feelgood doctors. You see a young actress in her dressing room at dawn, trembling with exhaustion after a 20-hour day on set. Before she can collapse, a studio-appointed physician administers an injection of speed, amphetamine combinations designed to mask fatigue, suppress appetite, and keep her eyes bright for the camera. When the shoot finally wraps after midnight and the chemical high prevents her from sleeping, the same doctor administers heavy barbiturates to knock her out for 4 hours before the cycle begins again. This chemical dependency was not an accidental byproduct of stardom. It was an intentionally managed tool used by the studios to keep their workforce operating at inhuman capacities. The ascent was a process of systematically trading away pieces of your humanity for a counterfeit version of immortality. Every contract negotiation was a reminder that you were an asset on a balance sheet, rented out, collateralized, and traded like machinery. As the box office numbers climbed and the crowds screamed your name outside the Chinese theater, the walls of the studio grew thicker, the surveillance more intense, and the isolation absolute. You were no longer a person, you were a corporate trademark, and the men who owned that trademark would go to any lengths to ensure that their property never diminished in value, no matter how much violence it did to the soul inside. You are walking through the echoing marble corridors of a hilltop estate in Beverly Hills at 4 o'clock in the morning. Outside, the moon reflects off the still, turquoise water of a swimming pool that cost more than an entire Midwestern town makes in a year. Inside, there is an eerie, suffocating silence. This is the home of a cinematic icon, a person whose face is currently projected onto 10,000 screens across the globe, worshipped by millions who would give everything they own to stand in this room. But as you enter the master bedroom, you see the reality of the summit. The icon is sitting alone on the edge of a massive, silk-sheeted bed, staring into the dark, surrounded by unread scripts, empty crystal glasses, and a security system designed as much to keep the world out as it is to keep the occupant in. This is the pinnacle of isolation, the golden hour where the illusion is complete and the human being inside is entirely hollowed out. At this height, the studio has successfully severed every normal human connection you once possessed. Your old friends cannot relate to a life where your every movement is a corporate event. Your family looks at you with a mixture of awe and financial expectation, treating you more like a lottery ticket than a sibling or a child. You cannot walk down a public street without inciting a riot, yet you cannot remain alone without facing the crushing weight of your own manufactured identity. Every relationship available to you within the Hollywood colony is transaction-oriented. The directors see you as a temperamental instrument. The producers see you as an erratic line item on a budget, and your fellow actors see you as a rival for top billing, scanning your face for signs of aging or exhaustion that might signal a shift in the hierarchy. You begin to observe the profound paranoia that infests the daily life of a top-tier studio star, the very apparatus that protects you, the studio's security detail, the publicists, the personal maids, and the chauffeurs, is also reporting back to the front office. Every phone call made from a mansion's landline is subject to wiretapping by studio fixers looking for leverage or trying to intercept a brewing scandal before it reaches the press. The walls have ears, and the price of your luxury is the total forfeiture of privacy. You learn to speak in codes, to hide your true feelings, and to trust no one. Because in this town, a friend's loyalty lasts only until their own contract is threatened. This isolation breeds a unique form of psychological decay, which the studios actively manage through chemical and material distraction. To keep their stars from focusing on the bars of their cages, the moguls encourage a culture of wild, unhinged extravagance. You are guided through the exclusive nightclubs of the Sunset Strip, the Trocadero, the Mocambo, where stars are paraded like prize thoroughbreds. The champagne flows endlessly, financed by studio lines of credit, and the glitter is blinding. But beneath the laughter, the desperation is palpable. This hedonism is an escape valve, a brief, frenetic pause before the studio limousines arrive at 5 a.m. to haul the revelers back to the sound stages, where the makeup artists will spend hours using ice, packs, and heavy cosmetics to hide the physical toll of the night's excesses. The weight of the crown is most crushing when an actor realizes that they are completely trapped by their own image. If the public fell in love with your innocent, small-town persona, you are forbidden from ever showing maturity, darkness, or complexity, both on and off the screen. If you were branded a sultry, dangerous temptress, you must embody that sexual availability constantly, even when you are broken, grieving, or physically ill. The character has swallowed the person. You are forced to witness your own life passing by like a movie you have no voice in editing, playing a part written by committee, directed by tyrants, and owned by a corporation. The wealth and the adulation are real, but they feel like a cruel joke when you realize you cannot buy back a single second of your own authenticity. You are standing on a deserted soundstage as the final generator hums to a silent stop. The towering wooden flats that once recreated ancient Rome or the high society parlors of Manhattan are now nothing but hollow, unpainted scaffolding, casting long, skeletal shadows across the concrete floor. It is late 1939, on the eve of a new decade that will bring a world war, television, and antitrust lawsuits that will eventually tear the studio monopolies apart. But for the people who built their lives inside this artificial reality, the collapse happens much sooner and much more quietly. You can see it in the eyes of the aging star standing under the harsh exit light. The contract is nearing its end. The box office numbers are dipping, and the studio that once promised eternal protection has just stopped answering her calls. The fractured empire is about to cast its children out into the dark. The descent from the pinnacle of Hollywood stardom was a brutal, unceremonious execution. The moment a star's face no longer pulled in the required margins, or the moment a scandal became too expensive for the fixer to suppress, the machinery turned against them with terrifying speed. You watch as a studio executive flips through a ledger, crossing out a name that, just a year prior, was plastered in neon across the country. There were no retirement parties, no golden watches, and no gratitude. The studio public relations department would coordinate a final, devastating press campaign, quietly planting stories in the gossip columns about the star's erratic behavior, difficult nature, or fading health to justify dropping their option. Within 24 hours, the gate guards were instructed to deny them entry to the lot. Their dressing rooms were cleared out by anonymous crew members, and the telephone lines that once rang endlessly went cold. The psychological whiplash of this sudden erasure was often fatal. Stripped of the identity that had been manufactured for them and completely dependent on the chemical vices the studio had provided to keep them working, many former icons found themselves utterly unequipped to survive in the real world. You track the tragic, lonely trajectories of these forgotten gods into the boarding houses and cheap hotels just blocks away from the studios that used to bear their names. Some turned to alcohol, others succumbed to the barbiturate addictions that had been hardwired into their daily routines for a decade. Without the studio's army of lawyers and fixers to cover up their arrests or financial ruins, their downfalls became public spectacles, viciously devoured by the same audiences that had once worshipped them. They had given up their names, their families, and their bodies to become immortal, only to find that immortality in Hollywood was a lease that could be canceled without notice. But as the final midnight rolls over this glittering, tragic decade, the simulation must come to an end. You step out of the empty studio lot and back onto the quiet, fog-shrouded streets of Los Angeles. The blinding glare of the Klieg lights has finally died down, leaving only the soft, amber glow of the street lamps filtering through the palm trees. The restless energy of the factories of illusion begins to fade, replaced by a deep, heavy stillness that settles over the valley. The long-dead voices of the studio moguls, the fixers, and the exploited dreamers are nothing now but whispers in the California wind, buried beneath the asphalt of a city that constantly rebuilds itself over its own ruins. You can let go of the tension now. The contracts have expired, the surveillance has stopped, and the heavy velvet curtains have closed for the final time. The figures we watched, the young dreamers from the trains, the manufactured gods, the isolated icons, have returned to the shadows, leaving behind only the flickering, silver ghosts on the celluloid reels. They paid the price for the dream so that you didn't have to. As the rhythm of the city slows to a gentle, steady heartbeat, the screen fades to black, the music dissolves into the quiet night, and the illusions give way to a safe, deep, and unbroken slumber.